The galactic station of Arkenspire floated like a jewel in the emptiness of space. Its vast towers shone with silver light, and the docking arms reached out like fingers to hold ships of every design and size. From small shuttles to mighty cruisers, vessels came and went with constant rhythm. The station was a hub where dozens of alien species gathered for trade, politics, and cultural exchange. For humans, it was still a strange place, full of towering beings with strange forms, but it was also a chance to prove themselves in a galaxy where strength and power were respected above all. Ethan Vance walked along one of the polished corridors, his boots clicking softly against the metal floor. His reflection moved beside him in the transparent panels that showed the stars beyond. He wore a neatly pressed security uniform, and though his build was average by human standards, here on the station he looked smaller than most. He had short brown hair, sharp eyes, and a calm expression. Many of the taller alien guards looked down at him with amusement, but Ethan never let it bother him. He had learned long ago that confidence was not measured by size. Today was different from his usual duty. He had been summoned to the Central Council chamber and told he was being given a special assignment. The message had been brief, offering no details, but it had carried the seal of the Galactic Alliance. As Ethan approached the chamber, he wondered what kind of mission could be so important. Inside the chamber, towering figures stood around a holographic display. Most were members of the royal delegation of the Velari, a proud warrior race known for their height and strength. Their armor gleamed with ceremonial designs and their voices rumbled like drums. At the center of the group stood Princess Kalira, daughter of the High Sovereign. She was nearly 3 meters tall, her form elegant yet imposing. Her skin had a faint silver shimmer, and her long dark hair flowed behind her like a banner. Her golden eyes carried both authority and curiosity. Ethan stepped forward, saluted with human precision, and waited. One of the Velari generals, a massive being with broad shoulders, spoke in a deep tone. Human Ethan Vance. By order of the Alliance Council, you are assigned as the personal bodyguard to Princess Kalira during her diplomatic mission. You will remain by her side until the mission ends. The words hung in the air like a surprise to everyone present. Several of the alien guards exchanged glances, their expressions showing disbelief. Even Ethan was taken aback, though he kept his composure. Kalira turned her golden eyes toward him and tilted her head slightly. Her voice was smooth but carried a sharp edge of humor. You are the one they send to guard me. You are too tiny to be my bodyguard, human. A ripple of laughter ran through the chamber. The Velari guards chuckled, and even some of the council members smiled. To them, the sight of a human barely reaching the princess's chest was almost comical. Ethan did not flinch. He met her gaze steadily and replied with quiet respect. Size does not decide how well a guardian can protect, Princess. I will do my duty. Kalira studied him for a long moment. She seemed amused by his calmness. Finally, she gave a soft laugh and waved her hand as if brushing away her doubt. Very well. Let us see if the tiny guardian can keep up. The assignment was sealed. Ethan was now her personal protector, whether she liked it or not. The days that followed were filled with preparation. The princess's entourage prepared to depart on a tour of neighboring systems, where she would meet with rival houses and discuss peace treaties. Ethan was given a place within her guard, though most of the Velari warriors ignored him. To them, he was a token presence, a formality ordered by the council. They did not think he would ever be needed. Ethan, however, studied everything with careful attention. He reviewed the princess's schedule, memorized the layouts of ships and meeting halls, and inspected every security detail. While the others boasted of strength and weapons, Ethan focused on subtle weaknesses, blind corners, unsecured access panels, emergency systems that could be turned against them. He believed that true protection was not about muscle, but about preparation and awareness. One evening, as the princess walked through the grand promenade of the station, Ethan followed at her side. The promenade was crowded with traders, travelers, and entertainers from across the galaxy. Bright lights reflected from the glass ceilings and music drifted through the air. Kalira moved with regal grace, towering above the crowd. She wore ceremonial garments of flowing blue fabric, marked with silver patterns that shimmered with every step. Many beings bowed as she passed, but she seemed distracted. With a glance at Ethan, she spoke quietly. Do you truly believe you can protect me, human? My people can crush stone with their hands. My enemies are fierce warriors. What can you do that they cannot? Ethan walked calmly beside her. His voice was steady. I can think in ways they will not expect. I can see what others overlook. And sometimes the smallest shield can stop the sharpest blade. Kalira raised an eyebrow at his words. She was not used to such confidence from someone who appeared so fragile beside her. She said nothing more, but her curious gaze lingered on him for longer than before. That night, Ethan found himself in his quarters, reviewing the data once again. He noticed patterns in the reports that troubled him. Strange shipments had passed through the station recently, and certain crew members of Allied ships had unexplained connections. To most, the details were harmless, but Ethan had seen enough intelligence work to recognize signs of preparation for an attack. He marked his findings carefully, planning to present them if the opportunity arose. Meanwhile, Kalira sat in her private chamber, looking out of the wide window at the stars. She thought of the human assigned to her. His small form had first amused her, but his steady words had stirred something else, an unfamiliar sense of doubt. Could it be that strength was not always measured in size? She shook her head, smiling faintly at the thought. Still, she could not ignore the strange feeling that perhaps the Council had chosen him for a reason. As the fleet prepared to depart, tension quietly grew beneath the surface. The royal entourage believed their mission would be a simple journey of diplomacy, but in the shadows of the galaxy, rivals plotted to end Kalira's rise before it began. And though she did not yet realize it, her tiny human bodyguard was the one person who might stand between her and danger. The great ships lifted from the station, their engines glowing against the black sky. Ethan stood at his post near the princess, his eyes scanning every detail, every face, every movement. Kalira glanced down at him with a faint smile, still amused by his size, yet oddly comforted by his presence. She whispered to herself, "You are too tiny to be my bodyguard, human. But perhaps tiny things carry secrets I have yet to see." The journey had only just begun, and with it, the story of how one small human would prove that in a galaxy ruled by giants, humanity's greatest power was not strength of body, but strength of spirit. The royal fleet moved silently through the dark sea of stars. The ships of the Velari shone like blades of silver, their sharp designs built to impress as much as to defend. Inside the flagship, Princess Kalira sat in the grand hall of state. The chamber was vast, with high ceilings and banners that displayed her house crest. Around her stood guards of her people, tall and broad, each armored in polished steel. Among them was Ethan Vance, standing quietly at her side. He carried no great weapon and wore no heavy armor. Compared to the towering warriors, he looked almost like a page or attendant rather than a protector. Yet he stood with steady posture, his sharp eyes watching every corner of the room. Kalira noticed his focus, but still found it hard to believe he could be of real use. She had grown up among a people who judged worth by size and strength. For her, a protector had to be someone who could block blades with his chest or throw enemies aside with one hand. The human seemed fragile in her eyes. Still, his calmness was strange to her. He never looked nervous, even though he was surrounded by giants. The fleet's journey was meant to be peaceful, but dangers always lurked when power was at stake. Kalira's father had many rivals, and her presence as a diplomat made her a target. Unknown to her, one group of mercenaries had already been hired to test the security of her mission. The attack came sooner than expected. The fleet had docked at a neutral trade hub to refuel and meet with local leaders. The hub was a large station, old but still busy with ships from dozens of worlds. The docking bay was filled with workers loading cargo and traders moving crates. Kalira stepped out of her transport surrounded by her guards, her tall form drawing every eye in the bay. Ethan moved beside her, scanning the area with care. At first, everything seemed normal. Then a group of workers dropped their crates and pulled hidden weapons. The bay echoed with shouts as masked mercenaries revealed themselves. They moved quickly, trying to surround the princess before her guards could react. Kalira's first thought was that her tall guards would crush them easily. She raised her chin proudly, expecting to see her enemies fall at once. But the mercenaries were faster than she had imagined. They had planned this well. Explosives sealed the bay doors, cutting off reinforcements. The attackers used energy nets and shock weapons designed to disable large opponents. The Velari guards fought hard but were slowed by their own size in the narrow bay. In the chaos, Kalira noticed Ethan. She expected him to run or hide, yet he moved with surprising speed. He ducked under a swinging weapon, rolled across the floor and reached a control panel near the cargo lifts. His hands flew across the keys, and suddenly one of the heavy lifts dropped from the ceiling with a crash, blocking part of the enemy's path. Sparks lit the bay as machinery roared to life under his control. The mercenaries were confused. They had expected towering fighters, not a small human who used the station itself as a weapon. Ethan darted between containers, drawing attention away from the princess. When two attackers cornered him, he lured them under a crane arm and triggered its release. The massive beam swung down, scattering them across the floor. Kalira watched with wide eyes. Her guards were strong but slow to adapt, while the human used every detail of the environment. He was smaller, yes, but his size let him slip through spaces the enemies could not follow. He was quick, clever, and fearless. One mercenary managed to break through the guard line and rush toward Kalira. She raised her arm to defend herself, but before the attacker could strike, Ethan appeared at her side. He grabbed a fallen tool from the ground and struck the mercenary across the wrist, knocking the weapon free. Then, without hesitation, he shoved the attacker backward into the path of Kalira's massive guard, who finished the job with one blow. For the first time, Kalira realized he was not only brave but also precise. He did not try to overpower his enemy with strength he did not have. Instead, he struck exactly where it mattered, turning the tide in seconds. The fight ended after several tense minutes. The mercenaries, confused and outmaneuvered, fled when station security finally forced the bay doors open. Several were captured, but many escaped. The damage was clear, and the message was louder than the sounds of the battle. This was only the beginning. Kalira stood among the wreckage, her golden eyes fixed on Ethan. He stood calmly, brushing dust from his uniform. Though his chest rose and fell quickly, he looked unshaken. "You," she said, her voice quiet but sharp. "You are not afraid." Ethan gave a short nod. "Fear is natural, Princess. The choice is whether you let it stop you." Her tall guards gathered around her, but none of them had impressed her as much as the human had in that moment. She still felt her pride resisting, but another part of her whispered something she had never thought before, that perhaps there was more than one kind of strength. Later, as the fleet continued its journey, Kalira found herself watching Ethan with silent curiosity. He spoke little, but his actions spoke loudly. He checked every room before she entered, studied every schedule, and never seemed distracted. She remembered how easily he had moved during the attack, using shadows and machines as if they were allies. His size, which she had once mocked, now seemed less like weakness and more like advantage. One evening, as they traveled through the quiet dark of space, Kalira decided to test him with words. She called him to her chamber where soft lights glowed against silver walls. "Human," she said, standing tall above him. "You were clever during the battle, I admit that. But tell me, do you truly think you can protect me in the long road ahead? That was only one attack. Greater enemies wait beyond." Ethan looked up at her without flinching. "I cannot promise there will be no danger, but I can promise I will always find a way to stand between you and it. I do not need to be the strongest. I only need to be the one who refuses to give up." His words struck her more deeply than she expected. They were simple but filled with certainty. She had heard countless warriors speak of power and glory, but never of refusal to yield. Kalira turned away, hiding the small smile that touched her lips. "We shall see, tiny guardian. The stars are wide and danger walks in many forms. Prove to me again that you are more than what you appear." Ethan bowed slightly, his voice calm. "I will, Princess. That is why I am here." As he left her chamber, Kalira stood alone, thinking. For the first time, she wondered if the council had chosen this human, not as a mistake, but as a message. Perhaps the galaxy was changing, and strength was no longer only the weight of muscle. Perhaps humanity's gift was something different, something unseen until tested. The fleet moved onward, carrying them deeper into contested space. The memory of the ambush remained sharp in everyone's mind, but it was Kalira who felt it most. She had expected her great warriors to protect her, but when danger struck, it had been the tiny human who had stood at her side with courage and wit. And though she would not say it aloud, she found herself hoping he would never leave her side again. The fleet traveled smoothly through the lanes of deep space. Stars glittered outside the wide windows, and the ships of the Velari moved in formation like silent guardians. Inside the flagship, life followed a routine once more. Yet the memory of the mercenary attack remained fresh in everyone's mind. The tall guards trained harder. The crew checked every system twice, and Kalira herself carried a new sharpness in her eyes. Ethan Vance, the human bodyguard, stayed close to her side as always. Though he spoke little, he noticed everything. He studied the guards, the servants, and even the smallest details of the ship's corridors. His mind was constantly turning, and soon he began to see patterns that troubled him. The mercenaries had not been random. Their weapons were specialized to fight against Velari warriors, and their ambush had been carefully planned. That meant someone had given them information about Kalira's route and defenses. Ethan could not ignore this possibility. Late one night, while the rest of the ship was quiet, Ethan sat at a console in a side chamber. He had been granted limited access to the ship's records, and he used it with patient focus. Data flickered across the screen: cargo manifests, crew assignments, maintenance logs. At first, everything looked normal, but Ethan had a habit of looking deeper than others. He noticed that certain supply shipments had been added to the fleet at the last station, yet their origin records were incomplete. He also noticed that one crew member had moved between 3 different ships in only a short time, something unusual in a disciplined fleet. To the Velari, such details might seem too small to matter, but to Ethan they painted a larger picture. Someone was planting false information, and someone inside the fleet might be working with the enemy. The next morning, Kalira found him reviewing the data once again. She raised an eyebrow at the sight of him bent over the console. "You spend much time staring at screens, tiny guardian," she said with faint amusement. "Do you not grow restless? My guards train with blades while you study lines of numbers." Ethan looked up at her calmly. "Numbers tell stories too, princess. Sometimes sharper ones than blades." She gave a soft laugh. "Always the strange words. Very well. What story do these numbers tell you?" Ethan hesitated, then spoke carefully. "They tell me that the attack on the station was no accident. Someone close to us may be passing information to our enemies. I believe there is a traitor." The hall grew quiet as Kalira's golden eyes narrowed. She was proud, and her first instinct was to deny it. The thought that one of her own people could betray her was not easy to accept. "You accuse my court of disloyalty?" she asked, her voice sharper. Ethan shook his head. "I accuse no one. But the patterns are there. I cannot ignore them. If we look closer, we may prevent another attack." Kalira studied him for a long moment. Her pride urged her to dismiss his words, yet her instincts told her to listen. She remembered how he had saved her during the ambush, and how his small size had not stopped his courage. Still, she did not want to admit her trust too easily. "I will consider your words," she said at last. "But do not speak of betrayal so lightly. Among my people, such claims cut deeper than blades." Ethan bowed his head. "I understand, princess. I speak only because I wish to keep you safe." The matter seemed to end there, but Ethan knew he could not stop watching. Days later, the fleet reached another neutral system, where Kalira was scheduled to meet representatives of a rival house. The meeting hall was built on a lush moon with tall glass towers and shining bridges that crossed over rivers of silver water. It was a place meant to impress visitors, yet Ethan felt uneasy as soon as they arrived. Kalira walked at the center of her guards, her tall form drawing attention from every corner of the hall. Her ceremonial garments flowed like a wave of blue and silver, and her golden eyes shone with regal calm. The rival delegates bowed politely, but Ethan noticed their glances carried a hidden sharpness. As the talks began, Ethan stayed near the edge of the chamber, his gaze moving from face to face. He noticed servants carrying trays of drinks, but one of them avoided eye contact too carefully. He noticed a guard standing at the far end of the hall, his armor slightly different from the others. Small details, but together they painted danger. Without warning, one of the lights above the chamber flickered. In that brief moment, Ethan saw the reflection of a weapon being raised from behind a column. His instincts screamed, and he moved before thinking. "Down!" he shouted, diving toward Kalira. A bolt of energy cut through the air, striking where she had stood only seconds before. The chamber erupted in chaos. Guards clashed, delegates shouted, and hidden attackers rushed from the shadows. Kalira's tall guards fought bravely, but once again the attackers had planned well. They used smoke bombs and energy nets, making it hard for the larger warriors to move freely. The princess herself drew a ceremonial blade, her movements swift and powerful, but the enemy pressed closer. Ethan guided her with quick words, pulling her toward safer ground. He overturned a table to block a line of fire and used a small pulse device from his belt to disable an enemy's weapon. He moved like a shadow, striking not with strength but with precision. Kalira felt her pride shift once more. She saw how he never hesitated, never doubted, even when facing warriors twice his size. His courage was quiet but unshakable. The battle ended when reinforcements stormed the hall, forcing the attackers to retreat. Several were captured, and when questioned, they revealed something chilling. The attack had been planned using information from inside the fleet. Kalira sat in her chamber afterward, her golden eyes troubled. Ethan stood before her, silent but steady. "You were right," she admitted at last. "There is betrayal in my own house. I did not wish to believe it, but now I cannot deny it." Ethan's voice was calm but firm. "We will find the traitor. But until then, you must trust me, Princess. The danger is closer than it seems." Kalira looked down at him, her expression softer than before. She remembered the words she had spoken when she first saw him, that he was too tiny to be her bodyguard. Now those words felt almost foolish. "You are small, human," she said quietly. "But you see what giants overlook. Perhaps the council knew what they were doing after all." Ethan gave a faint smile, though his eyes remained sharp. "Perhaps, but our work is not finished. The enemy will strike again." And deep in the shadows of the galaxy, the hidden traitor smiled, already preparing the next move. The days after the failed assassination attempt were tense. The fleet moved with greater caution, their patrol ships circling close like shields of light. Inside the flagship, Kalira's court was restless. Whispers spread through the halls that a traitor walked among them. Guards grew suspicious of one another, and the air carried the weight of mistrust. Princess Kalira sat in her private chamber, gazing at the stars beyond the wide window. Her golden eyes glimmered with thought, but her proud posture showed no weakness. She had always been taught that a ruler must appear unshaken. Yet the memory of the last attack lingered in her mind. She thought of the human by her side during the chaos, small yet fearless, and the words he had spoken about betrayal. She no longer doubted him. Ethan Vance entered quietly, his steps soft but firm. He carried a small data pad with the results of his latest investigation. He bowed slightly, waiting for her attention. "You may speak," she said, turning her gaze toward him. Ethan placed the pad on the table. "I have studied every movement, every report. The traitor hides well, but their actions leave shadows. Supplies that vanish without record. Routes altered without reason. Guards reassigned at the wrong times. All these threads lead to one place." Kalira leaned forward, her voice calm yet heavy. "And where do they lead?" Ethan's eyes met hers. "To someone within your own council, Princess. One of your closest advisors." For a long moment, Kalira said nothing. To accuse a council member was a grave matter, but deep inside she felt the weight of truth in his words. "Then we must be ready," she said finally. "If they plan again, we cannot allow them to succeed." Ethan nodded. "They will not stop until they see you silenced. The next strike will be stronger than the last. We must prepare for the worst." The opportunity came sooner than either expected. The fleet arrived at the grand summit of alliances, held on a neutral world known as Lumeris. Its capital shone like crystal, with towers of glass rising into the clouds and bridges of light connecting them. Leaders from dozens of races gathered here to discuss peace and power. It was a stage of diplomacy, but also a battlefield of politics where every step carried meaning. Kalira's arrival was meant to show her strength and the honor of her house. She walked into the great hall dressed in flowing robes of deep blue, silver threads woven into patterns of her lineage. Her tall guards surrounded her, their armor gleaming. Ethan walked close at her side, quiet and watchful. Many eyes turned toward him, for among giants he looked like a child, yet he carried himself with unshaken calm. The hall filled with speeches and agreements, but Ethan felt the undercurrent of danger. He noticed certain faces watching too closely, certain hands moving too slowly. His instincts told him the traitor's plan was already in motion. It happened as the summit reached its peak. Delegates raised their voices in debate when suddenly the lights dimmed. At first it seemed like a simple failure, but Ethan felt the tension before anyone else. He shouted, his voice cutting through the hall, "Protect the princess!" In that instant, hidden panels in the walls burst open. An elite strike team poured into the chamber, armed with weapons designed to disable Velari guards. Explosives shook the room and chaos filled the air. Kalira's guards drew their blades and charged, but the enemy pressed forward with precision. The traitor had guided them well, giving them every detail of the defenses. Within minutes, half of her protectors were down, bound by nets or stunned by shock weapons. The towering warriors fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed. Kalira herself drew her ceremonial blade, her golden eyes fierce with defiance. She swung with strength that sent enemies crashing to the floor. Yet more came, surrounding her from every side. Through the chaos, Ethan moved like water through stone. He darted between fallen banners, slipping past enemies who dismissed him as unimportant. He reached the control panels at the edge of the hall and triggered emergency systems. Smoke vents roared to life, filling the chamber with haze. Lights flashed, alarms blared, and confusion spread among the attackers. Kalira turned as she heard his voice cut through the storm. "This way, princess!" He guided her with sharp commands, pulling her into cover while her guards regrouped. Though she towered above him, she followed his lead, realizing in that moment that his quick mind was their greatest weapon. An enemy lunged at Ethan with a blade, but he ducked and swung a chair into their legs, knocking them off balance. He used no strength, only speed and timing. Another attacker tried to pin him, but he rolled aside and pressed a hidden button on his wrist device, sending a small pulse that fried the enemy's weapon. Kalira watched as he fought not to overpower but to outsmart. He turned every weakness into an advantage, every object into a tool. For the first time, she understood fully that strength was not always the weight of muscle. It was the sharpness of will. Still, the enemy pressed harder. The traitor revealed himself at last, a council member who had stood at Kalira's side for years. His voice rang through the chamber, mocking her pride and claiming her time was over. He pointed at Ethan with scorn. "And this is your great protector, a fragile human? You place your life in the hands of one so small?" Kalira raised her blade, her voice thundering in return. "He is small, yes, but he sees what giants do not, and he has already saved me where others failed." Her words carried strength, but the battle was far from over. The traitor ordered the strike team to finish them. At that moment, Ethan made his choice. He turned to Kalira, his voice steady. "We cannot fight them head-on, but if we control the hall itself, we can turn it against them." She nodded, trusting him completely for the first time. Together they moved, Ethan guiding her toward the central dais where the hall systems could be controlled. Enemies tried to stop them, but Kalira struck with her blade while Ethan used quick traps, pulling wires and pressing commands that disrupted the attackers' formation. It was an unlikely partnership, giant strength and human cunning working as one. When they reached the dais, Ethan slammed his hand against the control pad. The floor panels shifted, sealing certain doors. Energy shields rose, cutting the attackers into smaller groups. Kalira roared as she charged forward, striking down those who remained near. The tide turned slowly. The guards, inspired by their princess and the small human who refused to yield, rose again with renewed strength. Together they forced the attackers back step by step. The traitor tried to flee, but Kalira herself stood in his path. Her golden eyes blazed as she pointed her blade at him. "You betrayed your people. You betrayed me. There will be no escape." Ethan moved beside her, his small form standing firm against the towering hall. For a moment, silence fell, broken only by the sound of the enemy retreating. The battle was not yet fully won, but the worst had passed. Against all odds, they had survived, not because of size or brute power, but because of trust and unity. As Kalira looked down at Ethan, dust and smoke swirling around them, she felt something she had never felt before, complete faith in her tiny guardian. And though the galaxy still carried many dangers, she knew now that no matter how great the enemy, with Ethan at her side, she would never face it alone. The aftermath of the summit battle left the fleet tense but victorious. The traitor and his captured accomplices were confined securely in the brig, and the summit delegates worked to restore order. Though the hall had been damaged, the leadership recognized that Princess Kalira had survived due to her courage and the actions of her tiny human guardian. Ethan Vance Kalira stood on the deck of her flagship, overlooking the fleet as it moved through the glittering lanes of stars. The lights of distant planets reflected off the polished hulls of the ships, and the hum of engines vibrated through the floor beneath her feet. She wore a calm expression, though inside she felt a mixture of pride and amazement. Ethan joined her, his posture steady as always. He had been quiet since the battle, taking care of the injured and ensuring that all security systems were functioning perfectly. His uniform was marked with dust and minor scratches from the fight, but there was no sign of fear. "You have done more than I imagined," Kalira said, her golden eyes softening. "I once thought size was everything. I judged you before I even knew you." Ethan gave a slight bow. "I am only a human, princess. Size is never the measure of courage. I only did what was necessary." Kalira smiled faintly, a hint of warmth in her usually regal demeanor. "No, Ethan, you did more than necessary. You saved lives, including mine. You proved that sometimes the smallest shield can protect the greatest treasure." The memory of the summit's chaos was still fresh. Ethan had guided her through collapsing floors, disabled weapons with quick thinking, and turned the hall's own systems against the enemy. Every move had been precise and deliberate, showing a courage that dwarfed that of many larger warriors. Kalira realized she had been wrong to dismiss him for his size. His small frame carried a spirit that no enemy could match. The captured traitor was brought before Kalira and the council. His arrogance had not faltered until he saw the calm determination in her eyes. He tried to speak to justify his betrayal, but Kalira raised her hand. "Your plans have failed," she said firmly. "You trusted in strength and numbers, but you underestimated intelligence and courage. Your actions have brought shame upon you and your house." The council nodded in agreement. The verdict was clear. The traitor and his accomplices would face trial, and the security of Kalira's fleet would be strengthened permanently. Ethan stood quietly at her side, watching as justice was carried out. Though the attention of the council was focused on the traitor, Kalira felt the need to acknowledge him. She turned toward him, her golden eyes meeting his unwavering gaze. "You stood by me when no one else could. You risked everything for someone who doubted you. I owe you my gratitude." Ethan inclined his head, modestly accepting the praise. "It was my duty, princess." "That is all?" Kalira shook her head with a small smile. "No, it was more than duty. You have earned respect not only from me, but from all who witnessed your courage. You have proven that humanity is not defined by size or appearance, but by spirit and determination." As the fleet continued its journey to deliver peace agreements and restore trust among the allies, Kalira found herself reflecting on the events. She remembered the first time she had seen Ethan, mocking his small size and doubting his abilities. Now she could see clearly that his courage and cleverness had been the key to survival. He had anticipated dangers, reacted swiftly, and inspired even the largest guards to fight with renewed strength. The journey ahead was still filled with responsibility. Kalira would continue her diplomatic mission, traveling to other systems to negotiate peace and strengthen alliances. Yet she felt a newfound confidence knowing that she was never alone. With Ethan at her side, she knew that even the most dangerous threats could be faced and overcome. One quiet evening, as the flagship glided silently through the endless black of space, Kalira called Ethan to her chamber. The room was simple, adorned with elegant decorations that reflected the light of distant stars. She gestured for him to sit, and he complied, keeping his posture straight and attentive. "You know, I was wrong about you," she said softly. "I thought that being tiny made you unworthy as a guardian. I was foolish. You have shown me the true meaning of courage. You have shown me that intelligence, quick thinking, and determination can turn the smallest being into the greatest protector." Ethan's expression remained calm, but a small smile touched his lips. "I am glad to have proven myself, princess, but the credit is yours as well. You faced danger without hesitation and trusted me when it mattered most. That trust made all the difference." Kalira considered his words. For the first time, she admitted openly that she had underestimated humans. "Yes," she said, "and perhaps it is time that my people learn the same lesson. Strength is not always what it seems. Courage can come in any form." The days that followed were filled with recognition. Delegates from allied houses spoke of Ethan's actions during the summit. Stories spread across the fleet about the tiny human who had saved the princess and turned the tide against overwhelming odds. The Velari themselves, proud and disciplined, began to acknowledge his abilities, respecting his courage and intelligence. Even those who had laughed at him before now recognized the value of his quick thinking and strategic mind. Kalira continued her diplomatic efforts, attending meetings, negotiating agreements, and showing the wisdom of her leadership. Yet at every important step, Ethan was near, observing, advising, and ready to act. The partnership between the towering princess and the small human became a symbol throughout the fleet, a reminder that courage and intelligence often mattered more than sheer size. During a quiet moment on the observation deck, Kalira looked at Ethan as he studied the fleet's systems. "You know," she said, "I said once that you were too tiny to be my bodyguard. Now I realize that nothing could be farther from the truth. You are perhaps the bravest and most capable being I have ever known." Ethan paused, looking at her with calm humility. "I do not need to be the biggest or the strongest, Princess. I only need to be steadfast and willing to act when it matters. That is enough to protect what is precious." Kalira nodded. She had learned a lesson not taught in her warrior schools. True strength could take many forms. Humans, though small in stature, possessed a courage and determination that could rival the mightiest of warriors. Ethan embodied that lesson perfectly, and she felt proud to stand beside him. As the fleet returned to Arkenspire, the council formally recognized Ethan for his actions. He received commendations, praise from allies, and the enduring respect of Kalira's people. The once dismissed human now stood tall in the eyes of all, not because of height or muscle, but because of his unwavering courage, intelligence, and loyalty. Kalira approached him privately one final time before the fleet docked. "You have earned more than respect," she said, her golden eyes warm. "You have earned trust, friendship, and a place beside me that no one else can take. You are not merely my bodyguard, Ethan. You are my equal in courage, my partner in survival." Ethan bowed, a small but proud smile on his face. "I am honored, Princess. I will continue to serve faithfully, not out of duty alone, but because it is the right thing to do." And with that, the flagship glided into the station's docking bay. The crowd of diplomats, citizens, and allies looked on in admiration. Stories of the tiny human who had saved a princess and defended her against impossible odds were already spreading. Humanity, once underestimated among the giants, had earned a place of respect across the galaxy. Princess Kalira and Ethan stood together, the towering warrior and the small human, united not by size but by courage. Their partnership became legendary, a symbol of the truth that even the smallest among us can make the greatest difference. In the endless stars, it was not strength alone that mattered, but spirit, determination, and the refusal to give up. The galaxy had witnessed the courage of one tiny human. And from that day forward, the words that had once been said in jest, "You're too tiny to be my bodyguard," were replaced with admiration and respect. Ethan had proven that humanity's greatest weapon was not muscle or size, but the strength of heart, mind, and unshakable spirit. And Princess Kalira knew without question that no force in the universe could stand against such courage when wielded with wisdom.